just about ready to prime and give it a final coat of primer, but before I do that, I've noticed on the real aircraft, or most of the real aircraft, that there is a wing to fuselage fairing. And it looks pretty simple on most of them. It's basically just a small strip of sheet metal that comes down and goes across, and there's a real small radius. So I want to duplicate that. I think fairings actually add a lot to the look of a model. The first thing to do with making this fairing was put the wing on the fuselage and then trace the outline of the fuselage onto the wing. Then I looked at pictures trying to get an idea of just how big the fairing was. And the 3 views are no good for that. I didn't have a 3 view that has the fairing on it, so I had to use pictures and try to guess at the sizes. And I'm thinking that the upstand, the part that goes along the fuselage, is about 1 to 2 inches. And this is a 1/3 scale model, so I used about 3/8 of an inch for starters, this first line. But that didn't look right to me, it looked too small. So I bumped that to 1/2 an inch. And I used a compass and just traced around the outline of the wing saddle. And then I went over to, again, with an ink pen just to get a darker line. And then I looked at the wing, and the horizontal part that rides along the wing, that looks to be about 2, maybe 3 times as big as the upstand on the fuselage. So I started with about 1.5 inches, but that looked to be too long. So I dropped it down to about 1.25 inches away from the fuselage side. And I do have a picture that shows the fairing without the wing on it, and it looks like the fairing is actually sort of the same width all the way up to the leading edge. But I couldn't do that because the shape of the fuselage, it sort of bulges out to a point right here. So I took the 1.25 and then I drew a line at 3/4 of an inch away from the wing, and basically drew a straight line up to there. And then using a ship's curve, I basically ran the line parallel to the side of the fuselage with the ship's curve, and I did that on both sides, and that looks to be about right based on the pictures. Before mating the wing back to the fuselage, I applied packing tape to both the wing and to the sides of the fuselage. So after putting the clear packing tape on, I went back over my lines on the outside now, redrew them with an ink pen on the clear packing tape. And so now this ink mark will transfer to the resin and the fairing, giving me a nice cut line. The 1-to-1 fairing, it has a very small radius at the joint between the wing and the fuselage. So I don't want to put fiberglass straight in like this. It will just make a nice sharp 90-degree bend, and that's not really what I want. So I'm going to use, I believe it's called Plasticine. I believe Brits call it Plasticine or modeling clay. It's a little bit like Play-Doh, except it's oil-based, whereas Play-Doh is not. Play-Doh, I guess, can dry out and turn crumbly. This stuff doesn't ever really dry out. It takes a little more kneading to get it pliable, but once you do that, you can draw it out to a nice thin line like this. This one still needs a little more kneading to it. And what I'll do is just put it up against like this, and then I'm going to take a little bit of Vaseline in my finger and just kind of try to smooth this down into a nice small radius. The reason I'm using Vaseline to smooth this out is because I'm going to use Vaseline as my release agent to prevent the fiberglass part from sticking to the wing and the fuselage. And if I can prevent it from sticking to the plasticine as well, then that's just more the better. I have the plasticine smoothed out in about as nice even a radius as I can make it. Alright, a thin coat of Vaseline has been applied along the wing and along the fuselage. Alright, now I'll be using 2 pieces of 6-ounce cloth and then 1 piece of 2-ounce cloth, which has a real nice weave to it, makes for a very nice finish. And finally, a little piece of peel ply. The plasticine cleans up quite nicely, as expected with Vaseline. I think I probably just tossed this stuff. But the joint is clean, and I've got the part clean from plasticine. I'm just going to put this back in place because I want it to stay here for probably 2 or 3 more days to make sure that that resin thoroughly hardens up, makes the part as strong as possible. I'm not even going to bother to clean off the Vaseline right now. That does a nice job of kind of sucking the part down, helping it keep its shape. I decided to go ahead and make a couple of bottom fairings, bottom wing fairings. The top ones I could only get to go about halfway around the leading edge of the wing. So I need to try to finish this off, make it continuous. So I'll do it just like I did the top fairings. I have 2 pieces of 6-ounce cloth. I'll use 1 for each side, and then 1 piece of 2-ounce cloth, 1 for each side, and then I have some peel ply. I already have the area covered with clear packing tape. I'll add some Vaseline as release agent, and then I'll fiberglass this up. That took about 2 hours, and both sides are done.
I only used 1 piece of 6-ounce fiberglass for the bottom fairing, unlike the top where I used 2 pieces, because the bottom fairing, I really just wanted a representation of a fairing without the added extra weight of an additional piece of cloth.
Both of the lower fillets were given a coat of primer. I just brushed it on, and then a black guide coat. This side so far has been sanded back using 220 grit sandpaper and wet sanding. The top up here was roughed out, still needs to be fine-tuned. The side, in order to trim this one, I need to get the top fairing in place. And to do that, I've marked a center line where both fairings are going to meet. The leading edge of the top fillet was cut and sanded to shape, but I made a pretty big mistake here that I'm going to show you. I just marked the leading edge of the wing, but I didn't mark across the fuselage. And as you can see, when I sanded it, when I sanded straight across the fillet, well, that ends up making an angle down, unfortunately. So it's going to present a problem. I'm still going to do the same with trimming the top and then joining the two and fill it in with some putty. I'm hoping I can make that seam go away. So the aft part of this fillet has been trimmed, and I sanded the top flush with a stringer, and then the side was cut. So that's all looking pretty good. One thing, or actually a couple things. One, you may be able to see the little fiberglass nibs kind of sticking up. I get that sometimes. I think it's when I don't quite get enough epoxy in the layup. I really try to squeeze out as much epoxy as I can to make it as light as possible. I take care of areas like this. I just apply thin CA along the area, and after it cures, I sand it down, and that does a pretty good job of removing those fiberglass nibs. For gluing the fillet on, I'm going to glue it to the wing and not to the fuselage. I've got a real nice fit here for the fillet, and the idea is that when I put the wing onto the fuselage, this fillet snugs up tightly against the fuselage, and I don't have any unsightly gaps. Now, I really dithered over what kind of glue to use for this. I didn't want to use CA, at least not for the initial gluing. I will use thin CA later. I thought about epoxy, but I don't want to have to deal with the mess of epoxy, potentially with squeeze out, or also getting in between the gap between the wing and the fuselage. I have not put down any sort of release or barrier between these two because I don't want anything interfering with the fit of the fillet to either the wing or the fuselage. So I've got to be really careful into what glue that I use. And I think I've decided on the Formula 560 canopy glue. It's a little bit watery, but that I think should be good in that it'll thin out very nicely, and I can get a nice thin application along the whole thing. I won't put it close to the edge, again, as I don't want it to seep up underneath the fuselage and glue these two together. Alright, this one's done. I pulled the tape, and after that, to make sure the wing wasn't stuck to the fuselage, I unbolted the wing, and it came away cleanly, so no problem there. I'm happy with the wing joint, but the fuselage, it's a little bit too much of a gap than what I wanted. I'm a little disappointed there. I think I can fix this. I think what I'll end up doing is just taking a heat gun, softening up the fiberglass and pushing it more toward the fuselage, letting it cool, and then I can reinstall the fuselage, and I hope that'll take care of some of that gap. So I was happy with that, so I went ahead and glued the other one on in the same fashion. Gluing up these bottom fillets, I have to be a little bit careful because the fillet actually spans the joint between the wing and the fuselage. So I put a little bit of tape here on this end to prevent the glue from seeping into this joint, and I've marked on my fillet where not to put glue. This fillet turned out fairly well. I'm not sure if you can see it because it's gray primer on gray, but it turned out okay. The only real issue I'm going to have, and I'm going to have this on both of them, unfortunately, I rounded over the joint in the top, but I didn't do that with the bottom. I wasn't thinking about that. So I'll have to come in here with some probably epoxy micro balloons and kind of blend this in together. They had a little more of a gap here than I really wanted, but again, I can take care of that. Lower fairings are finished glued on. As you can see up front here, there's not going to be any support. Top fairing is fairly good. It's pretty stiff. I don't think that's going to be a problem. Bottom is a little bit loose, but I think it'll be okay. Now, what I have to do here, and this is going to be the trick, is to fill in this gap that I have on both sides, and I'm going to use epoxy micro balloons for that. Before mating the wing back to the fuselage, I needed to protect this area right here from the epoxy micro balloons. So I have some clear packing tape down, and then I rubbed some candle wax over this area right here. And then I decided to use Plasticine for this part right here to keep the epoxy micro balloons from seeping into this joint. I mentioned before that I was going to use micro balloons for this, but I changed my mind. I need for this filler here to be as strong as possible to prevent chipping and cracking, hopefully. So instead of using balloons, I'm using milled fiberglass. I'm not sure how this is going to work. This is the first time I've tried using milled fiberglass to fill a crack like this, but we'll give it a shot. I'm mixing it to the same consistency that I would use for micro balloons. See it? That right there is pretty good. It's got a very slight drip, but I want a little bit more of the epoxy in this, hopefully to keep it stronger, not resist the temptation, you know, to flake or crack. And I'm also using Zap finishing resin. No particular reason other than I just want to get rid of what I have before it goes bad. And it's an easy mix ratio, just 1:1. Now I'm going to try to create a little bit of a extra fillet right here. Sand down where the top fillet has that radiused corner, but the bottom is not. Also with the Zap finishing resin, it's about a 20-minute or so pot life, so hopefully my mix won't sag here too much before it starts to set up. Looks like it's sagging just a little more than I was hoping for. I should have added a little more of the fiberglass. I'm going to put on a nice thick blob of this stuff. It's easily sanded back. All right, the resin and milled fiberglass mix is setting up. I had to babysit it for about, I don't know, 45 minutes or so. So we'll let this cure a good long time, overnight at least, and then we'll start sanding back. The epoxy and the milled fiberglass has been sanded back, and I went ahead and sanded all of the guide coat and primer as far back as I could take it. And I'm pretty happy with this joint. I don't think you're going to be able to see it. I do need to primer it and probably put a little bit of black paint on it to really see how it looks. And just a quick shot with them all turned upside down.
The heat with the heat gun and trying to massage the upstand of this fairing, it did a really nice job on this side. It's almost perfect. Maybe just a little bit right here that sticks out, but I mean, it did a really nice job. Looks a whole lot better than it did. This side, better, but still I have a little bit sticking out. I'm thinking what happened is I shoved this fairing too far up underneath the fuselage, and the base is kind of pushing the top out. I'll live with it. I could maybe try to massage it a little bit more. Maybe just try to massage the top a little bit. But the heat trick overall works really well. After sanding back all the spot putty that I had, I went ahead and gave the fairings another coat of primer. I brushed it on so you can probably see the brush marks. And then I gave it a heavy coat of gloss black paint. I wanted to see how this would look underneath the gloss paint. Gloss white may have been better, but this is all going to be sanded off anyway. So I think this is going to look pretty good. I think I'm going to be able to live with this, no problem. I need to go ahead and sand this back, and I'm not going to show that. So I think for all intents and purposes, I can call these fairings complete. Let me see if I can show you the bottom. And here's the bottom. You can really kind of see the brush strokes. So I think I'm going to go ahead and, for the most part, call these fairings complete.